The Senate Education Committee, April 30th, about 3:30 after only the normal Senate floor. And we'll continue our work from 454. We left off yesterday with asking the council to make a few changes. I had one consistent with what Senator Hempstead was talking about. We just need to look at, or one thing she asked for. So there's a few changes to look at, and then we have some work done by JFO that we're going to have for this. So, for the record.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel, and I'm just waiting for the draft to go live.
Should be up now.
Okay. There it is.
So this is part one. This is the first. Yeah, this is Beth's.
Okay, so we're looking at draft 6.1 of the policy section. So all the changes, I think I've done a good job in highlighting on this one. So changes are highlighted in yellow with the exception of one place where it's highlighted in green, and I'll explain why. Page 2 is the first change. We're in section 1, the intent section, lines 8 and 9. There's some language added here that it is the intent. Bigger. So it is the so while transitioning to foundation formula and achieving scale, prioritize the following policy goals within the foundation formula and through education transformation, ensuring that the funding provided by different weights actually benefits the students that qualify for weight.
So recall the discussion from yesterday with Senator Hempstead about wanting to make sure there was some correlation and going to a district and then making sure that doing some of them to make sure that they were actually benefiting the kids when they were designing. And so this is putting it into the intent section. That's okay. On the assumption that's our kind of intent. And then you'll see later on it's referenced again, but I have Senator Hempstead talks about this specifically. So
Next change, we're going to jump to page 8. So this is section 2. This is the Commission on the Future of Public Education. And the change here is really, I highlighted lines 8 through 12 because editing needed to know that there was some punctuation change there, so they would edit it. But really the changes occur on lines 13 and 16 on page 8. And that is adding the analysis of the impact of healthcare costs on the ed fund, including recommendations for whether, and if so, what changes need to be made to contain costs. Adding that language that was struck later on in the bill, adding that to the work of the commission, the section that still remains live for them to consider.
okay.
Then we're going to go to page 15. We're in section 3, the school district boundary task force. And on lines 8 and 11, I've taken your membership from 3 current members of the House and 3 current members of the Senate to 4 current members of the House and 4 current members of the Senate, because I couldn't, and I highlighted that in green because I couldn't remember if it was 4 total or 4 from each. Okay, so pretend that's yellow. And then staying on page 15, section 3, on line 17 there, requiring that the task force's recommendations consider the use of supervisory unions and districts rather than maintain the use. And then some language at the bottom here on line 20 on page 15, that the task force is also required to consider and make recommendations for the governance models of the new proposed school districts, including how school board representation models should be decided. So are you all deciding? Are you leaving it up to the school districts? What's the recommendation here? And then, let's see. On page 18, along the same lines regarding governance recommendations, I just updated the deliverable language around the report to include those recommendations. So the boundaries, the alternative consolidation process, and the recommendations regarding governance models and representation considerations. And then we're gonna no changes to school construction. So that takes us to we'll go to page 35, which is section 13, tuition to approved schools. And the changes occur on page 36, but I just want to orient us. So remember, this is the section that dictates what educational programs a school district is allowed to pay tuition to. And so no changes to public school or the criteria that approved independent schools located in Vermont need to meet. But on page 36, I've broken up the out-of-state piece. So on line 9, subdivision 5, you have a public school located within 25 miles of the Vermont border, provided the school is approved under the laws of that state or province. And then 6, an independent school located within 25 miles of the Vermont border or province that is approved under the laws of that state or province, has at least 25% of its Vermont resident student enrollment composed of students attending on a district funded basis, and then complies with that reporting requirement.
I think actually, in this, I realize why this reads the way it does, because you just took it and upped it. I don't think the intent would be to have them have to be 25% Vermont residents, because that'll never happen. I think it's just that they have to be 25% of the kids at the school have to be tuition students. Because if you're talking about a school in New Hampshire, you're never going to have 25% of the kids in the school in New Hampshire be Vermont residents, if I'm reading this right.
That's what I.
Yes, this is the policy choice on your
No, I
part.
understand. I know that you just,
No, I'm just trying to think through the practical implications of this. I am unfamiliar with the New Hampshire laws and whether there would be any other state tuitioning students to a school.
Right.
or Canadian. New Hampshire has tuition, I believe.
So we have some from Essex County that go into, and I don't think it's a lot. So I don't think they fit this 25%.
Is that a public school or an independent school?
I think it's public schools that they.
Right, so this was about independent schools.
So public schools are right here.
Right,
So they just have to be located within 25
Okay.
miles of the border.
yeah. So this is if it's an independent school,
Yeah.
which I don't even know exactly who we're talking about, but I can suggest, it was raised to me that the original House bill that represented the governor's proposal, on page 30 of that, there's a whole section about meeting the same standards that our Board of Education sets forth. So they have a special education program, et cetera. So I'd be willing to substitute, I'd like to look at it, but there might be a way to substitute this for something that the governor had proposed. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I don't think that's actually what the governor has proposed.
Okay.
So let's
Oh,
pull
yeah.
up page
That's why I
30.
didn't realize 454 was the two.
Yes, so this is page 30 of H
Mhm.
454 as introduced.
Mhm.
So school choice schools, first of all, is a different
As in the
concept.
state.
No, so school choice schools could be, well, okay, so I believe this is an amendment to section 166, which is the independent school approval statute. It is. And let's see. These are all of the requirements that a school choice school, an independent school that wants to be designated as a school choice school,
Right.
which is just grades 9 through 12, so it's not elementary schools,
Mm-hmm.
would need
Yeah.
would need to meet these requirements. But later on in the bill, there is a directive to the Agency of Education to come up with a different set of standards for school choice schools. So what this is saying is follow education, let's see.
Yeah, I mean, 1 through 8 look good.
Let's see. Most of these things are already in current law.
For a school outside of the state that we'd be designated.
No, these are all in state.
Right, so could we take, so I can see multiple paths, but we take the language here or some reference to whatever's in current law that says you have to have a special education program. You know, you have to generally meet our policies, or we just cut private schools out altogether from the 25-mile border.
It was to that discussion we had yesterday.
But then
That means that
Senator Beck could,
then we'd have no kids coming to St. Jay.
I'm not sure of that. We haven't heard testimony to that effect.
They would reciprocate.
I don't know what that means, honestly, because we've never talked about it. And I don't want to open up a 25-mile border all around the state when Senator Beck could maybe just propose some language that deals with the St. Johnsbury reciprocity issue.
Okay, what we were trying to do here is narrow it, right? Because right now you can go anywhere, and we brought it down to within 25 miles. Now we're trying to add the same notion.
I just don't know. I think we are trying to do this for very specific schools, right? Like mostly public schools that our border kids go to. And then the only reason the independent school issue is coming up in my mind is because we're talking about reciprocity for St. Johnsbury Academy. I don't think it's a policy choice. I want to make that we're using our state dollars, especially in operating community, to open that up to choice on the other side of the border and sending our public dollars outside of the state.
But it's worth keeping in mind that the actual dollars are in comparison to the whole budget are tiny. We have $1.5 million.
But the governor proposed no money going out of state.
Okay, that happens, people propose things. The reality is the number of the dollars going out of state are tiny to start with.
They could grow. This is a huge policy consideration.
Thus the 25 miles that so right now you go into the world. So we're
If 25 miles is the only thing holding us to that, that's a huge hole in the proposal. That's not the same as
it's
25% of our students or there's no data that you're now using to say what constitutes a school within 25 miles of the border that would be eligible for this.
No, it's true. Parents would make the choice, but this is, it's not a hole because it's closing. So to talk, it's definitely not an expansion, it's a contraction. So the starting point is it's the contraction at 25 miles. Then we have a discussion of.
Okay, I'm using the governor's proposal as a starting point, which was nothing outside of our border.
Well, okay, I'm using today's, so we're fair enough.
Okay,
And I'm talking about the status quo.
okay.
And so we, this flows it in. And the theory that we want to allow kids from New Hampshire, partially kids from New Hampshire, then we have to keep in mind the testimony we had from NEK Choice and those other towns up there, kids going across the border. And I don't think we're totally clear if they're all going to public schools or something.
Then I would propose we do something very specific for the counties. We have something very specific on the one interstate district in the state, which is the Upper Valley one. We may want to look at that, but there's very specific things we write in. To me, it's not a good policy to just say 25 miles, including Canada, around the border without us being really clear what that means. That could open a huge loop.
It would leave the loophole such as it is intact.
It wouldn't, because right now, there's not necessarily, I don't know that it is tied to being a non-operating district.
Right now it's wide open.
Yeah.
You could get wide open
But it's not wide open right now in the state. I can't, someone in Franklin County can't just.
No, that wouldn't change no matter what. nothing, just to be clear about this. To the extent that it is true now in Vermont, tuition can come only from the non-operating districts, that remains true.
So do you have non-operating districts in your area that you want to be able to send kids with our public dollars across the border to a private school?
I don't think it happens where I live. I think it
Okay.
happens much more in the Northeast Kingdom than we
We,
and
Well Springs concerned if it's the Granville or.
that public, critical, yes, right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a hand, I don't know, I think we have to just be. So yesterday what we talked about was trying to make it be parallel to what we're doing in Vermont. Right, that you have to be, you have to have 25% of your kids come
From Vermont? No,
No.
See, that's
But,
where
but,
we
well,
did
that just means there is no,
that.
that just means that just closes it off.
I thought, I mean, look at the public schools we're talking about are ones that have a lot of Vermont kids. But I did not know what you meant. I don't know a lot of these schools. They're not our reality in Chittenden County. So I did not mean just 25% public school kids. That's,
No,
we don't know what that is.
Can I ask first if we have any kids going across the border to
Right.
these independent schools? Do we have any?
I think,
And why are we
I'll
spending 10 minutes on something which has no basis in, trying to codify some of the current realities?
I think Oliver may have answered that.
Oliver Olson, on behalf of the Vermont Independent Schools Association, for the record, I don't have precise figures, but there are approximately in any given year, and it shifts by maybe 10 students per year, give or take, but order of magnitude is approximately 100 students are being tuitioned to Gen Ed independent schools outside of Vermont. And Gen Ed, so we also have students who are going to therapeutic schools. That's not included in that number. I do also want to point out on the reciprocity issue, it's not just a St. Johnsbury issue. It also impacts Thetford Academy. Thetford Academy has a number of tuition students from New Hampshire. And there's a concern from Thetford's perspective about sort of the broader issues because of the fact that they are essentially in competition for Vermont students with Hanover High School. So there are a lot of, I just
Mm-hmm.
put to the committee, there are a lot of complexities around this issue. But the order of magnitude, to answer Senator Weeks' question, is approximately 100 students per year.
So it is a real issue. Just want to get to that base. That's perfect.
So when the governor's proposal designated school choice schools and said all of our dollars are staying in with these designated school choice schools, did you start to hear concerns from New Hampshire that would be a problem for them and they would retaliate?
My recollection from, and I can't speak for the administration, but my recollection when that proposal was first introduced was that there was testimony acknowledging that there would need to be certain exceptions for to deal with some of these border community issues.
So can your organization write something more careful about Thetford Academy and St. Johnsbury Academy? Because beyond that, I don't see a reason. Maybe we grandfather folks. I think there's a provision in here to grandfather students who are already at an institution that might be benefiting from out of state. But I saw this as the opportunity to start limiting our dollars going out of state. And I'm asking if people disagree with that.
Only if you're asking a young child that might just have to go over the New Hampshire border 5 miles to school or have to get in the car and go an hour to a public school in Vermont.
But
Then
that's a public schools that they're going to.
if they're going to a public school in New Hampshire or a public school in Vermont.
Right.
Yes, then I'd say that's a waste of our money
So that's not this section.
and now you're saying for a private school or independent.
The whole section's about independent schools.
Then there's
So
the
private
same
schools are a
thing.
different section.
I don't know if I'd want a child to have to travel an hour and a half just to go to a Vermont public school when they can take a 5-minute ride across the border into either an independent school or a public school. And if it's an independent school, it meets our requirements. I'd have no issue with that. That's saving the child sitting in the car an hour and a half going to an elementary school that's public in Vermont. And if we're worried about their education, that was a
So
very big
I'll-
concern.
What I asked from the Independent School Association was some specifics on where this issue would apply, which it sounds like is Essex County and Caledonia County. And
Could be any very border town this
Windsor.
way away, you know?
well, you're saying in Rutland and Addison, this is
Possibly.
public schools,
Yeah, I think our counties are pretty well set.
right?
But if we had somebody, let's say down in Pulteney, or they're real close to the. Yeah, they're public, but and they have a very good school system. More than likely it is Essex County because we heard testimony from there.
So.
They were quite a ways away from.
So, Mr. Chair, if you're talking the 25% of public student enrollment, I think that's what you're saying. From the 23-24 school year, it should be very easy to figure out which, even if it's not Vermont residents, which schools within 25 miles of our border have 25% public school enrollment. And if that's what we want to keep funding.
Tuition, which the way we do, the way we're doing it internally is to have 25% of kids tuition students, public tuition students. And so if we're going to make it reciprocal, I think that would be the language. Why don't we let Oliver take a look at this and we can talk about it, tomorrow.
Okay.
Because I think that's what you're asking, and we can think it through a little bit.
I'm asking it's a lot because I think this should be really surgical if we're going outside of our state to let kids continue to go outside of our state. This is a huge part of bringing our dollars back and having a more efficient use of our dollars that build capacity in our schools, independent or not, our schools in Vermont.
Yeah, and the only thing I'm cautioning about is that we want to make sure, because I have seen numbers in the past that show we're getting as many kids in as are going out. And I think we want to be careful about closing that door in either both directions because it might not be good for anybody. So I think we just want to
It might not, but I mean, we have not heard enough testimony for me to feel like that is the problem we should be focused on.
And I would also just like, some acknowledgement that the starting point here was to bring it in. It's the world now and it brings it in within 20. So that's.
Well,
so
So
I would
also
just not-
acknowledge that many of us spent years wondering why we're sending our dollars out of state.
And this was,
Period.
and this was a step to the direction of that. And just wanted to make sure that as we do it, we're not setting ourselves up for losing the kids coming in.
Okay, but I will just say my sole intent with the 25-mile range was to only acknowledge geographically isolated kids that need a closer option, public or private, not just.
Isolated.
Okay, let us do a little, I mean, again,
Do people disagree with that intent? Because I don't think you should just be able to take our state dollars and just take them over the border unless you don't have an option geographically viable for you. That sets up unequal education. That tells some kids in border areas that they can take their dollars to some independent school without many parameters across the border. That's not a good idea.
okay, let's think about it. Anyway, I've already said what I'm saying. We're just trying to anticipate unintended consequences.
I'm just trying to anticipate equity and lawsuit concerns.
Okay. So,
Next, we're gonna move to page 40, which is in section 17. So this is the big list of reports from the Agency of Education on topics other than special education. And so 2 topics are added here. So the report that's due December of this year on page 40, line 10. An analysis of how education payments are allocated within school districts and what, if any, changes are necessary to ensure students who receive weights are actually benefiting from the additional funding associated with the applicable weights.
so this was the section that Senator Watkins said was looking for. We put it on the first couple of pages. There's a line in the intent section on page 2 that you'll see. And then this is what this language is about. Taking a look at something that's a mechanism for ensuring that students who receive weight are actually benefiting. So it's just an attempt to get at what you were looking for. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. I will say for my part, I've tried to continue having conversations about this as well. And there are a lot of education policy experts who kind of nodded to what Senator Weeks said, that you might, you generally can trust that people who value education will take those dollars and try to improve everyone's education by bringing those kids up and integrating them into the larger whole. So I think it's still good to make sure if we create really large districts, we look at this phenomenon and see what other states do. But I feel fine with studying it and not trying to manage it right now.
And then a new reporting requirement due December 1st, 2026, requiring AOE in consultation with Career and Technical Education Center directors and the Department of Labor to submit a written report with recommendations on how to better utilize the nonprofit sector to increase flexible pathways opportunities for students, including work-based learning opportunities and community-based learning opportunities.
So this was the other thing you had talked about particularly yesterday.
I feel like such a prima donna, but yeah, it is. And I think others brought up CTE too. This is just my unique contribution to this conversation in economic development.
Okay,
So play devil's advocate for 30 seconds. What about we recognize CT, we're going to recognize CT in some manner. And we have nonprofits, what about the profit sector, in the commercial sector? This is where these kids are going to work for the majority.
I can speak on that. I actually had a CTE student who was recommended. He came and actually applied at our auto repair business. And we kept his attendance, how he was doing his work, actually paid him.
Mhm.
And he got, got credit at school for graduation. So I don't know if we want to put profit /
I think you could make it more vague. I think when it was looking at opening it up a little wider as an actual policy, to me, it was the nonprofits that do like workforce development, but studying it, we should look at everything that could bear credit and get you CTE.
because there again, maybe when we get out more rural,
Yeah.
they might not have as many nonprofits, say, as in Chittenden County.
Well, some of us went to the opening of the apprenticeship center in Winooski, and I don't know if it's nonprofit or not, honestly, but yeah, just the trades don't have to be nonprofit for them to be credit bearing.
You may want to switch that.
Senator.
I think Senator Weeks brings up a really good point in regards to that. And I would say replace the word nonprofit with commercial. I would say the commercial sector. So, there's a garage in town, a mechanic. Student can go there and apprentice.
Well, we just commercial and nonprofit.
Can we just cut out nonprofit?
No, actually, I think you want to,
She's on to something.
I think you might want to say commercial and.
Well, you could just say how to better utilize flexible pathways.
Yeah, but we're trying to target them to solutions that apparently aren't being well utilized now. Let's
I think nonprofits fall into the commercial sector, but yeah.
I think it would be different. That's the,
I mean, what we're asking to have done is to utilize more than CTE centers, like the field.
well, I think, let's just say, I don't think there'd be any harm in saying commercial and nonprofits.
Okay.
Right, I don't think there'd be any harm in that. Yes, we're where we're trying to go, I think.
I just want to note that work-based learning opportunities and community-based learning opportunities are already a thing. There's already entire programs run through the Agency of Education for students, and there's an entire different chapter on student apprenticeship programs that all have programs built out. So it already exists. My understanding is you just want to report back on how to increase those opportunities.
Right, but we're singling out nonprofit, and I don't think we should just single out nonprofit in this comment.
Noted.
Leave it open, but recognize nonprofit as something that this report should target.
Well, if we could spend another couple of minutes on this discussion and what Beth brought up, I want to make sure I do understand what we're asking for. So what we'll get back, because I'm talking to nonprofits that do workforce development, home building, etc. And I think if like the VYCCs of the world could have figured out how to be accredited to provide CTE and get those dollars, they would have done that.
So I think there's a difference between being accredited to provide CTE, that's separate,
Uh-huh.
than work-based learning opportunities, the student apprenticeship program, and community-based learning opportunities.
So I don't want those. Though that wasn't language I used. I think exactly what I said was how the CTE credits and dollars can flow to outside of the CTE centers.
Okay, I mean, this is all policy.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think it's
I'm just
yeah.
gonna flag, if you're talking about education fund money flowing to private businesses.
Well, what I'm saying is I want to look at how and that I didn't mean private, I guess. So we're back to that conversation. But we have Habitat for Humanity, BYCC, other organizations that are losing funding right now that I would like to see how they could become CTE programs so that kids are not getting turned away when there's no space in a CTE center.
If I could just, when we talk about career and technical education programs, like that's a defined term in Title 16, and you can't just, the law is not written in a way that you can just take an experience and deem it a career and technical education program. Like there's a whole host of things. So what I would suggest is you leave it even broader.
Yes.
And you just say, submit a written report with recommendations on how to increase flexible pathways opportunities in the commercial and nonprofit sectors. Flexible
Great.
pathways include, by definition, CTE, work-based learning opportunities, community learning-based opportunities, all of those flexible modes of meeting your graduation requirements. So I think you leave it flexible and you just ask for a report back on how to better utilize that space in providing those alternative options for students.
Is there
What?
any early college in everything?
Early college is also included in flexible pathways as well as dual enrollment, but those are post-secondary settings versus workforce settings, which is what the only reason I didn't mention them.
I don't recall asking for it to be in consultation with the career and technical center directors because the last thing they said to us that I found really dissatisfying, I'll say, is, oh, they can go to another center if we're full. They just have to figure out their own transportation. That's really challenging. That I feel like does not really acknowledge the realities of low-income kids trying to get career and technical education in our state and being turned away from programs for some reason. So I feel like we've consulted with them. I don't know if they're the ones that will tell us how to expand beyond their physical plan.
I've already made my suggestion for language. I'm writing it down.
Okay.
And unless someone has a better idea, this is what y'all are
So
getting.
you're taking out in consultation with career and technical.
Yes. And I'm going to bring you language that says shall submit a written report with recommendations on how to increase flexible pathways opportunities for students in the commercial and nonprofit sectors.
Why
Period.
could you do in consultation with the new workforce czar?
I don't know who that is.
I don't either. The
Oh, you
position
took
that got-
that, so it has-
Yes.
Is it actually called the SAR?
No, and I don't remember. We called it that for so long before we passed the bill, and I don't know what it's actually called now. The Director of Workforce Strategy or something,
I'll figure it out.
whatever that is. Yeah.
You never heard.
Yeah,
I like the Sarah bit.
I know.
Okay, moving on. No changes. Oh, nope. Page 42, we're in section 18, which is the special education delivery report. On lines 3 and 4. Adding, this is what the, this is the request for recommended changes to structure, practice and law with the special education with the goal of, and then on line 3, I added a new subdivision that says addressing the root causes leading to the workforce shortage of special educators. 42. And then on page 47, I updated an internal reference that was off due to taking a section out on line 1. And then on page 47, lines 8 and 9, I added a reader assistant heading. And on page 48, this is the section regarding a approved independent school functioning as an area career and technical education center being allowed to charge a district, a sending school district, a PTE fee not more than 10% of the base education amount. And I just added clarification that would be on a per pupil basis.
So this was new to us yesterday, and I want to support this. I'm still trying to understand the difference between the independent schools that have an on-site CTE and places like Essex High School that have a CTE attached to Essex High School. Like, is there a difference?
Yeah, the funding is different.
What?
The funding is different.
The funding is different. Tell me how the funding is, tell me how this, does this equalize their experience, or?
I can't, Essex, so to use your example,
Mhm.
the Career and Technical Education Center that's part of the Essex Westford School District is a locally operated career and technical education center. They charge a tuition. There's a whole statute, multiple statutes, and then a whole State Board of Education rule series on how those tuition is set.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 approved independent schools
Mm-hmm.
that also have career and technical education programs. They have been designated by the State Board of Education to serve as a regional career and technical education center, meaning they have school districts that is their designated place to send their kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
Those 2 schools, St. John's Career Academy and Linden Institute, are not considered career and technical education centers for the purposes of setting tuition. They are considered comprehensive high schools.
Okay.
And comprehensive high schools charge a tuition amount under section 823 of this title, which is just the public education tuition amount. It's the tuition that a high school or an elementary school would be charging.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this section 1546 says is comprehensive high school, you're going to charge a sending district under section 823 of this title, which in the sections that John walked through yesterday, section 823 essentially says the money follows the student. So you take the base amount and then any weights applicable to that student, and that would be what the student brings to them to an independent school, or in this case, a comprehensive high school. H454 in all of its iterations thus far has not addressed career and technical education and tuitioning in general.
Mm-hmm.
So because those laws haven't been amended, the public career and technical education centers, even under your new foundation formula, as this draft exists today, would still be able to charge tuition under the formula that is set up in the state board rules.
Mm-hmm.
Comprehensive high schools are not allowed to do that. They can only charge tuition pursuant to the tuitioning, the public tuition chapters. So there's general education tuition and CTE tuition. Comprehensive high schools are only allowed to charge the general education tuition, even if they have a CTE center. This section says, or the subdivision section says, that if you are an approved independent school functioning as an area career and technical education center, you would get your general education tuition, the weight or the base and the weights. But you could also charge that sending school district. You could elect, so it's a may, not a shall, a CTE fee of not more than 10% of the base amount. So if your base amount's 15 grand, that's a $1,500 fee per student. And on top of the weight, the base and the weights that the student is bringing with them. This doesn't touch public CTE centers and how they are charging tuition.
So does that mean, so I don't know why they're separate, but anyway, the the public CTEs, do they all get above the weighted amount?
So the difficult part in having this conversation is there's nothing in this bill, in either what you have on the table in the House's version or in the bill as introduced by the administration, that changes how career and technical education tuition rates are set. So absent making changes to current law, if everything were to take effect now, you would have school districts being allocated money from the state based on John's work, of the base amount and the weights applicable to each student. And the CTE centers would still be able to charge whatever they want for tuition, with a huge asterisk that when I say whatever they want, it's as dictated by the calculations and State Board of Education rules.
Okay.
And I don't know if that would be more or less than the
Okay.
base education amount plus the weights.
So why wouldn't the proposal be to just add them to the same, the same statute?
That's a policy decision.
Right now, they in the way they are right now, St. J and LI can charge whatever they want for CTE. They negotiated obviously with their districts. And it's a CTE is a lot more expensive to operate than a regular school, because there's often fewer kids in classes, etc. And so what this does actually is put a cap on it.
Does it?
Yeah, 10%.
But then what is it? What is the in addition to the tuition charged pursuant to subsection B?
That's
This. So a comprehensive high school shall
Uh-huh.
charge and receive tuition payment pursuant to section 823.
Okay.
And 823 says the money follows the student. The base and the weights applicable to each student equals 823.
Okay.
And then this is saying on top of the base and the weights applicable to each student, so it's going to vary from student to student, an independent school functioning as a career and technical education center may also charge on top of that 10% of the base amount.
Why? I don't know who gets more or less, but why would we make them live under two different systems? Why wouldn't we just say, hey, like we need to create predictability, so everybody has to live within a particular box for CTE?
Well, there's only most CTEs are not comprehensive. One difference there, some of them are actually even totally independent. The district, like where I am, and they set their tuition, which they can do now under this. And you know, in the end, all this is doing, I think, the intent here. Let me just be clear about the intent. The intent is that take a St. Johnsbury or an LI, they would just get, as putting aside the CTE for a second, they would get the same amount following the student that a public school does. It's just a sort of like, and what this does is intended to do is make sure that the CEPE doesn't go under, because it doesn't have the ability to raise some extra dollars like any CTE by definition has to in order to succeed, because CTEs are more expensive to run. And so in this right now, St. Johnsbury and LI just set the tuition at whatever they want. And this was just in the sense of wanting to make clear, I think, and Oliver, you could jump in on this, that like the school like Bernburg or St. Jane now just sets their tuition. As we 2 levels, we've taken it down to just being the same as everybody else gets, just to make that clear with tuition as a whole. And this is just to make sure that there's some limited ability to keep the CTE afloat with some semblance of the, I think St. Johnsbury charges more than this now, beyond, because that's what it takes to run a CTE. So this is just to put a cap on it, but make sure that there's enough dollars there. This is, by the way, a little bit of a blunt instrument, because the 10% is a little bit, but I think there was some feeling they could live within it. But I'll ever do anything to add to that.
This actually begs a couple questions for me. So one, right now, with the per pupil weighted amount that we're sending from the state, if a community adds 10%, does that all stay with the district? So that's only a district can charge that, so that can't go to these folks.
Yeah, these schools are not, these schools are giving up in large measure, giving up their ability to set tuition.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's that's
Okay.
just played by the, you know,
And are there any other comprehensive career and technical education centers?
There are two schools that qualify as a comprehensive high school, but they are not career and technical education centers. They have programs within them. But they are not CTE centers.
Okay.
And this is specific to this new language that you're contemplating here is specific to approved independent schools functioning as career and technical education centers. So that would exclude those two other programs.
Mm-hmm.
it's in the wind, you know, but, okay.
Did you have a question for them?
No, I did, he asked, he said, nothing.
So I do have some. So actually, when St. J came in here, St. Johnsbury Academy came in, they said that CTE is a part of the school. And when it's time to go to their math class, they just go down the hall into the math class. So I didn't get an indication that they charged any more for CTE. It was just the same tuition.
It is, they charge a tuition to their sending house.
Correct.
Which has a CTE quality, which is actually pretty significant.
Yeah.
It's more than this
Did
right now.
Did they tell us how a student elects into CTE?
No. They might have told us, but I don't remember.
So do we know how many pupils would have the 10% fee added? If it's comprehensive?
I don't know how that works.
Did you raise your hand? Does anyone know?
What is the specific, sorry, John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. What is the specific question?
Well, so if these are uniquely comprehensive, meaning they're integrated,
That's not what comprehensive means.
so how do the students get designated as CTE students?
That would be a question for the school. The two schools that would be impacted by this new subsection D have been designated by the State Board of Education to function as career and technical education centers. My understanding is that that means in addition to the students that are enrolled in those schools, they also have students that are enrolled in other high schools that are being sent there for just CTE courses. So I don't know how, I don't know the numbers and the difference between enrolled students or the CTE specific students. And I think that would be a question for the field.
So if it's 10% and in addition, is there anything in the language we're considering that ensures that whatever they do, we're clear about the level of funding provided, depending on if a student's taking one class or their whole school day, or they're partially a regular student and they just take a computer science class.
Nothing in this bill or the language in front of you addresses career and technical education, governance, funding, policy, other than this language. And so if you're not seeing anything in this language that explains your question, then I would say there's nothing in the bill that addresses that, because this is it for CTE.
I need to know what this does before I support it. Whether that's now or on the floor, like, I don't know. I can't understand what this means for these comprehensive CTEs. If they have students coming for different amounts of time and different pathways, I have no idea what this does. And no one in this room seems to.
So I don't know
Okay.
the deep specific
Okay.
to this. But I look at it only as setting a cap, which I know is lower than they charge now, but
I don't know that though.
I understand.
That's not
That's
clear.
fine, that's fine. So do you have, I mean, we could probably just get Senator back because he understands this
Yes.
specifically. So,
Do you want me to text him?
yeah, text it. Yeah. But why don't we keep going in the short?
Nothing else. I walked you through all of the changes that I was responsible for.
And have we lost that? Sorry.
No, he had to step out, but he's on call. 5 minutes and he'll be here ready to go into the witness hearing.
Let's see if Senator Beck happens to be available this minute to answer these questions.
Other than the change regarding the report back on increased flexible pathways opportunities, I have put a big question mark on page 36 regarding the parameters around tuition to independent schools located out of state as an open policy question for you all. But I have not made any other notes about changes. Does that track with what you all are thinking at this point?
You're looking for questions?
Yep.
Page 2, line 8. Going back to Senator Hinsdale's comments yesterday about the money actually following the students. I don't know if that paragraph G properly answers that question. If I was to analyze this 3 years from now to see if the money should follow the student 100% or for the generic use of the district for the benefit of the student. I'm not sure the language, how the language would lead me to the answer to that.
Then I need help from you on what language you would like to see.
Right, that's the conversation.
Okay.
So my recommendation is we need to figure out if we're really trying to follow a student, like, one-to-one student, or in a generic sense for the benefit of the student. I think that's a worthy conversation for a minute or two, and then we put it to bed, we find the right language, and off we go.
So, I think where we, at least in part, or perhaps ended yesterday, was wanting to not be overly prescriptive. But then just have some sense that as a rule in large measure, and here's Senator Bex, we can have the
You guys are fine.
help us through.
We're quiet down.
Yeah.
Well, first time.
So Senator Beck, we were looking at the language about the CTEs.
Do you want me to leave the chair?
Um,
Can you pop it back up?
Pop what back?
Yeah,
Oh,
that paragraph. 10%.
why don't you, well, maybe just use that, Jim.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So we're looking at the language about the CTEs and the 10%, the ability of the two independent comprehensives to charge the 10% on the base.
Okay.
And there were questions about what I can let people in the end ask their own questions. Like, what does that really mean? Which students are touched and how do they get counted into some of that?
Okay. Yeah, so for the record, Senator Beck, Caledonia. So what I call the comprehensive CTEs, which are St. Johnsbury Academy and Linden. They're different than the other CTEs in the sense that they are totally integrated into the school, like completely. They are part of the school. They're not as separate in any way. And so what that means is that, we have kids going back and forth for one class or two classes or three classes or four classes. And we don't really, it's not like I guess I think the term is the public CTEs where kids will go for 2 blocks or, we'll have a kid that goes for 2 blocks and then does another block of welding and then comes back to the school for their other 2 classes. And so we don't really, I think we have like 400 kids in school, just at St. Johnsbury Academy, that take CTE, and about half of them are what you would call
traditional FTE type of student, but the other ones, you know, they don't hit the half or the full, but they're taking the classes, they're moving back and forth. And so it's not really, you know, the CTE model of paying doesn't really work for what's being offered there. So I had, you know, so I was looking and said, well, if we, you know, paid on an ADM basis instead, and I took a stab at like, okay, so what would be, because obviously if you're paying on an FTE basis, that's going to be a really big number. But if you're paying on an ADM basis, it's a much smaller number, but it's on an ADM basis. And so what I looked at, you know, about what the FTE charges and, you know, based on percentages of the kids at these schools that are in the CTE programs. And it looked to me like it came up to about 10% of the base amount, you know, I guess $1,400 or $1,500, which is about the different bases that you guys are looking at. Whereas I think the CTE, if you're on an FTE basis, was, I mean, it's that, you know, they charge, I mean, the CTE centers are charging upwards of, I think it's upwards of 32, 35,000 for it on an FTE basis. But this is like, so every kid can just take whatever CTE class they want to take, and they do. But it doesn't really fit into the FTE bucket. So I just, you know, I said, I think it should be a far, far smaller number than we're paying for an FTE, but it applies to a bigger cohort of kids.
So the question was asked, how does St. Johnsbury Academy decide who takes CTE?
Every kid can take any CTE class, whatever they want, and can fit it in their schedule. We only have, I think we only have two, what you call FTE students. They come to us from Danville High School, but everybody else is like, if there's a CTE class there and it fits into your schedule, you can go take it.
So
One more question. So if they go from welding class to math.
Yeah.
They don't go to a special math class as math. They don't go to a math class designed for.
I don't, not in that department. I know we do have some English courses that are tailored to CTE. They're not considered CTE courses, but they call them technical communications. It's not a CTE class, but it's an English class that's tailored towards the kids that are really doing a heavy CTE. But yeah, they'll come to history and then they'll go to welding and then they'll go to English and then they might finish up with 2 blocks of electricity or whatever.
Yeah, let's wait for that. So just to get it straight in my mind, a CTE like Hanford Center,
Yeah.
the student will leave and go for sometimes the whole day and have math and English mixed in. If it was attached to Middlebury High School, and they might not do that anymore. That's when I went through.
Yeah.
But if we had a student that only went for half a day and then went back out to finish their, you're saying that's why the CTE costs more than what it does if you're for the students at St. J, because it's more.
No, I don't know if it costs more.
Because 10% is only $1,400 more on top of the base.
Yeah, but it's on, you know, your base is your EDM count, not your FTE count. So there's a different base there. I don't think it costs more. I think it actually probably costs the same, but.
And you feel that you believe that doing this math right here is about the same.
I think it's about the equivalent. Yeah, I think I heard APA might be trying to actually calculate a number. They're probably, you know, more able to, but this is what it looked to me like this came out to be about the same amount of money. Yeah.
So if APA came back and said, hey, you need to adjust that sum.
Yeah, I'm just whatever's fair is what I'm looking for. So, yeah.
So, I mean, what I want to sort of put out there as where my question is coming from is with other separated campuses,
let's even say Essex Tech and Essex
Okay,
High School. They are operating a different physical plan. They have a whole another set of, you know, they have a different campus. So they necessarily have to set a tuition that's
Yeah.
potentially separate. And, you know, it's coming from the school district. Usually, so,
Across the parking lot.
well,
Essex.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's a parking lot between them.
No.
Um,
Sidewalk.
yes. So you're a Danville student. And you are going to take one class at St. J. One CTE.
Well, they would have to take 2 to qualify as a half-time.
Okay, so so they take 2 classes, they're a halftime FTE.
Yeah.
What happens under this calculation?
Well, then they would be treated just like like a kid would at Essex Tech Center. So if a kid from, I don't know, CBU went to Essex halftime,
Mm-hmm.
then CBU would pay a half FTE tuition to Essex. If a kid from Danville, who's, you know, different school district,
Mm-hmm.
came to St. Johnsbury, those 2 kids, they would bill those 2 kids on an FTE basis, just like the kid from CPU got billed for. But this is just with ADM, we're talking about ADM of the school, not the districts or county or any other.
But it says they may purchase sending school district.
Oh, good point. Maybe that could be the school district that sends the tuitions a kid to St. Johnsbury Academy.
Oh, a whole
That's-
kid?
Yeah, like
Okay.
St. Johnsbury sends, I don't know, 300 kids to St. Johnsbury Academy,
Yeah.
and their students at St. Johnsbury Academy. Sending is referring to that situation, not because this is the CTE on a per pupil basis, whereas somebody that just, you know, a kid leaves Danville High School and goes to St. Johnsbury,
Mm-hmm.
they're not coming to St. Johnsbury Academy on public tuition. They can't. It's not allowed. But they are coming as a CTE student, and they would pay the FTE rate.
So is that from the language, is that what that does? It doesn't. Is it which sending school district to support?
I think sending school district is ambiguous here. It would capture any school district sending a student to the CPE center. If the intent is to limit it to school districts that are sending students on public tuition under chapter 21, then I would need to add language for that.
Yeah, I think that's my intent.
Okay.
That this is not, D here is not inclusive of the situation where a student that is not publicly tuitioned to St. Johnsbury Academy, but it goes to St. Johnsbury Academy just for CTE. That student would, in my mind, and I think there maybe does need to be a little bit of change to that language, would not be included in. That's the same situation as a kid from CDU goes to Essex or Winooski goes to Burlington or something like that.
Okay, then what I think this is doing is setting a CTE weight just for these 2 schools right now.
Right.
When I don't know that is that going to take effect at the same time as everything else, or because we haven't done anything else with CTE. So this is like a new CTE weight that we're doing this year without talking about how we need to do all of CTE like comprehensively, because we don't.
Yeah, this would just be for FY28. This is because I mean we're on so right now
Yeah.
the way that those 2 schools, they capture the amount of money that they need to operate their school and their CTE is they set their tuition at a level that's necessary to get the resources they need to do all that operation. Okay. We're talking about a system here where they effectively don't have the capability. They're not going to be allowed to set their tuition any longer. Okay. So there needs to be a way to capture.
I mean, maybe they will, right? Like, just like maybe the other CTE centers will be able to set their tuition or not. We don't know yet because we haven't.
Well, in this,
Then the
in
policy
this
says that.
language,
That's accurate.
those schools are giving up their ability to set their tuition. Instead, they're saying, we're gonna take the base, we're gonna take the weight. That's how the money would get to those schools. And so what we're trying to do here is to say that one of the things that they're offering
Mhm.
is CTE to all their students, and CTE is small class sizes. It's a more expensive proposition to run.
If I simplify this down to the basic question, it is, are we baking our CTE proposal in right now for the 2 independent CTE integrated comprehensive places, and then figuring out the rest next year, even though all of this won't take effect till FY28?
What's the rest? I don't.
There's nothing else about CTE tuitioning or waiting.
You mean
or
how the
anything.
public CTEs get their money?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think, unless you are gonna put something in here, they need money too, right?
Right.
Public CTEs, their tuitions are higher than what secondary schools are charging. And that's an issue for them too, is, if Hannaford, somebody told me Hannaford's tuition was $32,000 a year. I don't know if that's right. Maybe Senator Heffernan knows, but if they're, $32,000, and the districts that are getting, are receiving, I don't know, their base and their weights and all that is like 22.
mhm,
So then, yeah, where is the money going to come from
right.
to get the extra 10 to go to Hannaford, right? I think
But let's figure all that out at once, because we don't know if 10%
Yeah.
is I don't know if that's right. Why do we need to make them feel better right now for FY28 if we don't know what we're doing with everything else related to CTE?
Well, I think I think for anybody, and that's whether it's a public CTE that typically gets paid on an FTE basis, or an independent school that typically capture their money, but through the use of setting their tuition,
Mhm.
I would be very hesitant to sign off on a funding system that did not include a revenue stream that I know is critical to the operation of the CTE. I don't know where, what is in the rest of the bill here that you're looking at, but I absolutely think you need for the school districts, that are sending, that there should be a mechanism there so they can capture money on an FTE basis.
Right.
Yeah.
But barring that, I don't want to do something really specific to 2 schools because all of them are special snowflakes. And we need to look at all of them together.
I agree with you. I think that mechanism is probably an FTE
Right.
capture mechanism. My only point here is that an FTE capture mechanism is not an appropriate mechanism for these 2 schools, but
But we're still going to have to figure out what is appropriate
for
everyone.
absolutely.
Because
Yeah,
some of them are getting accredited, some are
Yeah.
not, some are just taking one class. That happens everywhere.
Yeah.
We're talking about getting CTE accreditation
Yeah.
outside of a CTE. So I just don't think this is ready for FY28. I don't want to decide this for FY28 and
I would,
nothing else.
I'd say, like I said, I would be very reluctant to sign off on a system that does not have a capture mechanism in there when these 2 schools are giving up their capture mechanism. They get left in the lurch.
Then can we put them in a section with the rest of the CTEs where they just charge a tuition?
An extra amount of money per CTE.
Yeah, because
Well, that's kind of what this.
we don't have a plan for FY28 altogether right now.
Yeah, no. Good update.
I mean, there's a lot of things
I know,
that we might be
I know,
uncomfortable about for
And-
FY28
my only
that
point-
we haven't sorted
I
out.
guess the only point I'm trying to make is that I would be if I was a school that has a program that requires resources,
I would be very reluctant to sign off on a funding system where there is no revenue stream. If I had public CTEs, I'd be just as nervous right now looking at this. Yeah.
One of the things that was brought out in the testimony from CTE, the reps were here, was that if you hire somebody from the industry that's a master plumber, master electrician, that, you know, the instructors, they pay more for them because to get them to come to the school to be the
Money.
right, because they can make 150 grand a year.
The CTE report indicates that they do pay higher amounts and they typically have smaller class sizes.
Right.
So without arguing the point here, I think what was going on with this is that the independent schools are giving up their ability to set tuition, which is a sea change. And there was a fear that unless the mechanism for CTE was built in and they have no ability to set tuition, they'd have no access.
But we could put them in the current mechanism that other CTEs use to set tuition.
No, because it's different. It has to be
It'll
different.
cost you more money.
It has to be different.
I don't know that. We don't know that.
I don't know the cost more money either, but like I said, the FTE way of capturing doesn't work in conferences.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
But the FTE way, all of them have that issue. If they're coming from another district, because their CTE doesn't have a particular program, then they do have to have a different calculation for that.
Yeah, they do it on an FTE basis.
So
remember how there's the different governance models, the three different governance models? This one's pretty unique. Is part of the point. It's a unique governance model.
they all are unique though, and we're not dealing with the other two.
Not arguing. I just want you to know that this came from the fact that the independent schools are like St. J is giving up its ability to set tuition.
Okay,
And right now its tuition includes.
sure. Everybody's in a trust fall for next year because we haven't done CTE. So why would we say this is correct in a vacuum?
I think it was only that concern that led to the giving up.
Nobody has certainty. Nobody has certainty right now.
Well,
No district.
I don't disagree with you. If I was the public CTEs, I would be very, very nervous right now about I don't know what's the rest of the spill right here, but a system where you cannot identify where the money will come from to pay the extra resources that they need in those public seats.
Sure, but they would be more nervous if we said, let's take care of this one version and the other two we'll deal with next year. If we're nervous about CTE because we have every reason to be, I don't want to say it's important to address it in one area, but not all of the
I'm
other.
not saying it's not important. I think you should address both of them. I'm more familiar with this language right here because this works for the schools and the CTEs in my area. But I definitely think your committee should address the funding gap in all the other CTEs in the state as well. It's part of the funding formula, and it should be. Right now, at least for the public CTEs, I don't know of any language in here that solves their problem. This would solve the problem of the conference.
So I'm happy to put in a proposal to substitute this that puts the comprehensive CTEs in the tuitioning system that all of the other CTEs live with for right now, because we are going to deal with this next year, but I would not want to create a whole new formula, a whole new weight based on two schools in a vacuum.
The FT model does not work for those two schools. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, there's an error.
I'm going to the Camford Center Monday at 9:00, and everybody's welcome to come. If you want to come.
Why don't we draw a circle on this one? All right, yeah,
Good, thank you.
figure out how to, yeah. Good. Okay, I think we're on to Ezra.
Thank you.
We have these, right? That's right.
Yes. Yes, I believe so. You should have been provided with, a new slide deck as well as some new printouts. Sorry, it looks like I was disconnected from the Zoom when I had to, leave the room. So I should be joining here momentarily. All right, looks like I'm in. So if you're ready, Chair, I can go ahead and get started.
Yes.
All right, for the
Oh,
record,
you're not, you go, oh, yes, that's one.
can I share?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and while I share this, for the record, Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office. And today I am coming back to you all with the request that Chair Baumgartz gave at the tail end of yesterday's testimony to truncate sparsity down to 0, but maintaining the small school weight for schools that fall within the sparsity of less than 55. So Joint Fiscal Office, we are still nonpartisan legislative office without a policy decision, policy position. And a lot of this is kind of a repeat from what we've seen. So would you like me to go ahead to the new sections, Chair, or would you like me to go through the entirety of the presentation?
Oh, I think the new section is the,
All right,
right,
all right, sure.
where things changed from yesterday.
Yes, absolutely. So the model scenario today is on scenario B2.2. And so the difference here I'll point out is that we're maintaining H454 weights constrained to education payment in line with our current education payment of 1.88 billion. I've added the pupil grade weights, but here you'll see the new wrinkle is I've eliminated sparsity and then applied this to current law districts. And so the small school weight has been maintained for all schools in an area less than 55 people per square land mile. And the reason I just point that out is because as it has been, as passed in H454, you had to be a small school in a sparse region. So just clarifying here that even though there's no sparsity weight, that is still being checked to see if you're a small school or not. And so just for quick review, the original scenario B2 had a base of 14,653. And then and that was at the VSBA region level. And then you'll see when we went ahead and modeled scenario B 2.1, which moved to the current law districts, you'll see that all of the weights are the same. However, the district lines have changed, and that actually lowered the base slightly, because actually by shrinking the districts, we found an increase in the number of sparsity, because you had small districts that had been sparse districts that had been absorbed into those larger VSBA regions, and thus were no longer being counted as sparse. However, when you broke all 119 out, we found that they were all getting additional pupil weights. And so because the modeling request was to keep at that 1.88 billion there, if you increase the weighted count, that means your base has to come down to keep spending levels. So that's why the base under this scenario that we went through yesterday went down And today, this is the new scenario for you all, and I've underlined that I've eliminated sparsity, but other than that, all of the weights and scenario is the same as B 2.1. So you have current law districts. However, none of them are receiving sparsity. And so you'll see that the base has gone up to 14,698. And that's because, again, if you're holding spending constant, you're removing a weighting category, you're basically saying that these funds that were being held for this specific weight are released effectively into the whole system. And so the base is taking that and redistributing that money basically to the rest of the system. Because if you no longer have, and I think it looks like about 1,200 weighted pupils was the reduction from the removal and sparsity. So if you have 1,200 fewer weighted pupils pulling on the same dollars, all of those 127.9 thousand all get a little extra money because there's now same pie being split by fewer long-term weighted pupils. And again, I know we went over this yesterday, but as a quick refresher, that long-term weighted ADM is what I'm referencing to with that LTW ADM, and that is the student counts after you've gone through all of these weights of FPL, EL, grade weights, etc. And so the base multiplied against the district's long-term weighted ADM is how the dollars are assigned to that district. So after a district's gone through their weights, that's then what your base is applied to get their total funding. And I've put all three of these scenarios next to each other so you can kind of follow along and see the changes. And you'll notice that this latest scenario is the one with the highest base figure. And that's because, when we started with VSBA regions, I think was this on Thursday when I first came in here? It all runs together. But on Thursday, you had only one region. I believe this is the model where you only had one region receiving that sparsity of because Kingdom North, the VSBA region of Kingdom North, was the only VSBA region that qualified for this fewer than 36 people per square mile for their students. So then when we maintained that, but opened up to all 119 individual districts, sparsity, the number of students in that sparsity went up. So that means your base went back down. So now I've gone and done the kind of the opposite. Okay, sparsity is now down to 0. It's been cut out as the model request was, and that means that the dollar amount has risen even above where we started because there was still a little bit of sparsity under scenario B2, and now there's no sparsity whatsoever. But you still have a small schools weight for schools in a fewer than 55 people region. And just collating all this by county, just again, all these districts stand on their own, but just have a 10,000 foot snapshot of what this has done to the state. You'll see, and I will point out, I have a few please notes here. That bottom one is new. The Taconic and Green Regional USD was moved from Rutland County to Bennington County. The Agency of Education had tied this district to the Rutland County in their data. However, we've been, asked to move it to Bennington County by the chair and to have everything tie out there for.
So just to explain that, the Taconic and Green is, I don't really know exactly what it is, but 90% Bennington County, a couple of little tiny towns in Rutland County. And for some reason, the way that gets categorized by the agency, it's in Rutland. And so what it does is very much distorts Because I was shocked yesterday when I saw the numbers for Bennington that had gone like so dramatically in one direction from the West End, which was because of that categorization. Because if you look at it now, when you get to it, you'll know that it's not.
Rupert.
Well, Manchester, Dorset, Sunderland,
Yep.
Langborough, Peru, Winhall, they were all sent to Rutland.
Oh. Oh,
They're all Benton County towns.
it's
So
a deal.
it just distorted what was really going on, especially in Bennington County. And so I just thought it'd just for the sake of actually taking something closer to apples, I was looking worth moving it back into Bennington County.
That was just a lot of students, period, that were moved.
Yeah,
A lot of ADM.
a whole lot of it.
Yeah,
Everything
no.
was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
When it was that you talk about the tail wagging the dog, that was nothing with the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, so because of that change, that's why you see a dramatic shift in Bennington's relative change, and that's not due to the sparsity elimination that was modeled here. That is due to the fact that Taconic and Green, as the chairs point out, it has a substantial amount of long-term weight ADM, and so moving that, you'll then look down at Rutland and you'll see again a change there because tainted off. So it's just calling out that that's why I believe yesterday Bennington County had a much higher increase in their relative percentage gain, and that's why you see it's down to just 13.5%. Greatest relative decrease is still within the Addison County area. And again, just pointing out here that school districts have been sorted based on the counties provided by the AOE data. There could be another case of this Taconic and Green situation within other counties. This is agency data, and so I didn't think it was appropriate for me to kind of go through and take a map and try and resort all this data because I don't know the classification schema that's being used. There could be very good reasons to have Taconic and Green keyed in the AOE system to that Rutland County. So just pointing out that this same situation could occur within a different one of these counties here, but just laying out that's why you see such a dramatic change in Bennington.
I think it's a dramatic change in Grand Isle too. I don't remember seeing them being a double-digit outlier. And I imagine that's because it's a densely populated little chain of islands. It's, they just happen to have really small schools, but not sparse communities. So, I mean, I think if you ask most people, they'd probably agree that Grand Isle County has some hard choices to make in the future. But it still might be fair to hear from someone from Grand Isle particularly, because I think they have some geographic isolation that looks unique for them because they only have one road in and out basically on either side.
Well, I think what this does is simply show what a combination of base and weights, how they play out in the county.
Oh, I know. The big change. I can't remember what Grand Isle looked like before, but
From yesterday?
from yesterday, when you change, they don't have sparsity somewhere. They don't have sparsity. They just have.
This isn't changed from yesterday. This has changed from the current, right?
So this is the same table that we went through yesterday, updated for those two changes I laid out, which is moving the Taconic and Green, and then the elimination of sparsity.
Yeah, and I think that it had, I think the question is that it had a big, that removal of sparsity had an impact.
Actually, I think whenever we started to remove sparsity, period, Grand Isle started looking double-digit decrease. So that happened yesterday to them too. So I think it's a little,
Oh, so you're thinking like, how were they on the 81 or something?
I'm just kind of curious about their unique geography. They're just densely populated on these very skinny islands. And we don't hear from them very often. So,
So at least from the printout I have from yesterday, it looks
Same.
like Grand Isle was down by, looks like 12.8.
yeah,
So from what I'm seeing, they increased by a relative 0.8. And so if you look, the long-term weighted ADM count has not changed within the Grand Isle county. And so the reason that it has a less of a decline is actually because when you remove sparsity from the system, if you were not a district that benefited from sparsity, your base goes up and you actually, in this model, better than, because it's per.
varsity plus small school. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, so, if you have a fixed pot of money and you
Yeah.
have fewer people cutting into that pie, to just use a metaphor
Because the
here.
base amount goes up for everybody.
Exactly,
Got it.
exactly. So if they were not a district benefiting from sparsity,
Mhm.
then they actually would do better. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that sparsity is per, I think it says per land mile. So just pointing.
I know what I was getting at. It's just like they have a lot of shoreline and water. I don't know what that does to them in terms of varsity. But I was just trying to speak up for my neighbor because they don't have a lot of representation.
Sure, and absolutely, not to go, that flipping through all of the different handouts, but just to give you an example, you'll see that now the Essex County, just to grab the first one I can, is now up 0.5, and it looks like yesterday I saw it looks like a 3.2 relative increase, and you'll note that the total long-term weighted ADM has decreased. That's because they were a county that had some sparsity. So as sparsity was removed, the effect of losing those long-term weighted ADMs was greater than the effect of increasing the base. So overall, while they would still see an increase under this model, they see less of an increase than what they would have seen under 2.1 because they benefited from sparsity more than they benefit from the base going up. So,
Got it.
yeah, the unique geographic considerations of every county, demographic considerations when you have high school and middle school weights, economic disadvantage, EL weights, all of those means that if you make one change, you're really going to spread out throughout the system. So, I still have the same set of considerations for you all here. If you would like me to go back through them, I can. A lot of this, since it was a relatively minor change, a lot of this is the same as what was presented earlier in the week. And so I don't want to take the committee's valuable time rereading a slide that I think you all have memorized by now. But if you would like me to just list off some of the really important ones here, I mean, they're all important, but, just hit a few, high notes here. Again, this estimates don't reflect any other research on appropriate funding levels. This is an exercise of really just modeling the impacts of when you pull on a certain lever or push a certain button and how that can affect the whole system when you have a fixed pool of money. And again, pointing out that different district configurations result in different estimates. I mean, here sparsity has been totally eliminated. So the districts that have been configured as sparse are the ones impacted. But when you had district configured like in version 2, just when it was VSBA, and the only region in that construct receiving sparsity was Kingdom North, if you had that construct with no sparsity, you would see a different impact if that was the construct you were doing, because under modeling scenario B2, you only had one region receiving sparsity. So if you did that with no sparsity, it would look a little bit different from what you are looking at now. Just, the configuration is really, I think, something important to keep in mind. And again, supplemental district spending, categorical aid are not considered in this analysis here. And really, that's all the new information I had for the committee. You all have your printouts here, and of course are free to ask any questions that you have. I've got my question slide up, so
Thank you.
absolutely. And if you would like me to go back to any of the other slides or anything, just let me know, or whatever.
Great, sir.
Yes.
If you're able to answer this, are you aware of any research that supports the removal of those two tiers of sparsity?
So I know all I can say on that is that the H454 as passed, which used Dr. Colby and Baker's cost function research, only had sparsity for fewer than 55, whereas in current law, we have 3 tiers of sparsity. So their research pointed to the removal of that highest tier, and just do fewer than 55 was considered sparsity. Going further than that, I have not seen any research. I can't answer that.
Oh my God. Thank you.
So any other modeling people want to look at?
Addison's pretty frustrated all the way around.
Yeah, you just can't win. I hope people didn't take that as flippant, but truly, there's no scenario for you. I think there's an open question about revisiting the special education weights and just knowing what that would do.
I mean, putting in the. Yeah, we actually just haven't, we left the.
Executive
That's a
concert.
block.
Yeah,
That's a block.
yeah. I just think it's worth, because the House did have this special education weights. I'm just saying if there's anything we need before voting the bill out, probably to just revisit that. Does anyone ask for modeling on the House side? Is it hard to model? I
can't recall having any modeling requests from the House at this time
okay,
for special education.
yeah,
Does anyone have anything or something?
Okay, I think it's gonna be in here tomorrow.
Okay.
And Starpoint, I don't know. I think we're the only ones that've done any modeling. Well, I shouldn't say, I don't know what the area we have granted done, but the House didn't do modeling. So we've been trying to.
So just to clarify, I am scheduled in House Education for some testimony on Friday.
mhm,
However, that does not involve a specific modeling request like what we've discussed here. So it's not that the House has not asked us for any presentation about it, just I have not done any, like, if we change this, what happens? Like what we've done in this room
right,
where we contemplated changing a sparsity or anything like that. But JFO has done some, taken the students with disability counts and the different tiers and applied the weights as proposed or as passed, by the House. So we have done that. However, we have not done like what has happened in the committee of if different weights were experimented with or were changed, how the changes flow through the system. So we haven't done any modeling like that, like what we've just gone over now, for example, of the effects of changing one of the weights. If that answers your question.
yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to make sure we honor that if we were to need something this week, we need to ask now. I mean, like, if we needed something before we vote, we need to ask today. So I don't think it's useful to look at special education like across districts because it really varies depending on students that enter your system. But maybe we could just look at one district or like a district A, and compare the block grant categorical aid to a weighting system. But would you need a contract established? Because if we get into those special ed rates, they're very specific.
Or this gets to the issue you raised.
That data's a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll let Ezra has been working on a lot of the special education modeling, so I'll let him just speak to the feasibility level of it. The other, just before that, the other bigger picture piece that I would know is that there are other special education costs beyond the census block grant, right? There's the extraordinary ed, there's the pieces fitting into ed payment. So it's not, it's a very complex picture, right? That's partially the complexity of the modeling reflects that. It has been a big undertaking that Ezra's been working really hard on.
So, when it comes to constructing, what I'm hearing is, are you suggesting a prototypical district? You said District A. So, so that would be an option. Another option is to take your disability categories, because as passed by the House, you have category A, B, and C. And within each of those categories, you have your primary disability category, whether it be the autism spectrum disorder, traumatic brain injury, or, they fit into one of those three categories. So that's another alternative of modeling is taking what the state is currently doing at that level, or just seeing what the cost would be when you say number of students in category A times the weight in the base, what that cost would equal. That's another way to get maybe at what you're thinking at, rather than constructing a district, is to look at disability category. That's because as passed by the House, that's kind of how it's different.
I can look at it outside of committee if nobody else wants that information. I just feel like this is going to come up before the end of session. So we could wait. If we're not going to change it, we can just wait till after the bill out to understand what the weights would do
On it over the
next week or so.
we
Yeah.
can pull forward into next year. Yeah.
Well, because I just don't know what we would need to be informed about to influence the conference committee discussion.
Okay. Happy to, we can certainly work on it.
But maybe for next week, we have what you're suggesting, the prototypical district with the categories.
So, if I may, there's a district, or you can just look at the state as a whole. You could just take the statewide data rather than,
Yeah.
construct a hypothetical district,
Sure.
Doing the modeling at the state level.
That sounds great.
Okay.
And just make sure we're talking about this, you're talking about the special ed tiers.
I'm talking about what Ezra's talking about, which is
Okay.
what they did in the House bill,
Okay.
with the 3 tiers.
Yes, they have,
Three
Want to make sure we're
Yeah.
okay.
and just calling. Yeah, so again, just a caveat to call out, as passed by the House, is using the base of 15,033. So if the base is different than 15,033, you again have the question of the weights are now generating a different dollar amount for special education than as passed by the House. Just calling that out, as we've discussed throughout with all these weights, just reiterating that point. So.
Um, but I think, thanks, thank you, Ed. So I think we can maybe pick up where we left off with John. Yesterday. People want to take a quick break, we've been a quick break, please, we get, okay. For a quick break, let's just say, be back at 5:30. Just sound off.
right, you're back. Okay.
One question yesterday, and John, stay right where you are, but wanted to ask Oliver Olson, because we had the question yesterday about how many schools with independent schools within Vermont would no longer be eligible to receive tuition. And I asked Oliver to take a look at that with the restrictions that we've now put on within Vermont. Now we're talking, we had a question yesterday saying if we do the the school must be located in an SU with non-operating districts and the 25%. And so Oliver, the answer to that.
Yeah, so for the record, Oliver Olson on behalf of the Vermont Independent Schools Association. So I can give you some general estimates with the caveat that the source data that I've obtained over the past few years from AOE is in turn sourced from the field. So it's aggregated up from the field, and I have noted and flagged AOE various errors. So I just want to be clear that there are always issues with the underlying data, not due to anybody's fault, just the manner in which the data is collected. But what I can tell you is that in school year 2024, there were 43 approved independent schools in Vermont that received, and for purposes of this discussion, I'm excluding the therapeutic schools, so I'm just talking gen ed schools. There were 43 independent schools that received at least one publicly funded student.
From another state.
No, from.
Okay.
Yeah, so this
I'm
we're just in-state estimates.
Okay.
So, yeah, thanks for clarifying. So this is for students, Vermont students attending Vermont approved independent schools. So these are students coming from a so-called non-operating district. It does not operate a public school with those grades. 43 students is what the data shows. Under
You mean schools or students?
schools, thank you. 43 schools. Under the Senate proposal, 14 of those schools would be deemed ineligible by virtue of the fact that they're located in a fully operating supervisory district or supervisory union that only has fully operating school districts. That's the first prong of the proposed test. The second prong of that test is that the school for that school year ending 2024 needs to have at least 25% of its student body publicly funded. Under that test, 12 additional schools would be ineligible. So there would be a total of 26 schools deemed ineligible. So that is a 60% reduction in the number of approved independent schools that would be eligible for public tuition. And for comparison, the number of, I think to state the obvious, the number of public schools that would be ineligible for public tuition is 0.
What was the reason for the last figure 12?
12, yeah. So these are schools that have less than 25% of their student body that are there on public tuition. So that's, to answer the question, those are the numbers.
Pretty big number.
So yeah, there'd only be 17. Again, this is just an estimate. And I will say, for the record, there are schools that are on the margins, and there likely will be conversations around, whether certain data points are accurate or not. But approximately 17 schools would remain eligible.
Yes.
Roughly number of students implicated.
I did have that number. Let's see here. I want to say, I don't have it in my fingertips, but I can come back to you.
Of course, as we know, the vast majority are at the 4 academies.
Yes.
So that's how we continue.
The vast number of Vermont students attending independent schools. Below those two. Right.
Our the four academies, yeah.
So this is, this has nothing to do with the border issue.
No.
Yeah, that's a separate. Much more difficult.
I'm trying to figure it out, because what you had wanted to do yesterday, the senator was make it the same across the board, so that's what we were trying, that's what we tried to do before, but let's move on, because we gotta get to it. For the record,
Don Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. Forward my,
pick up your sheet that says John at the top of the following today.
yes, so this is the Senate Education Finance from page 454 draft 1.1. I think we made it yesterday, and I have on the screen, the foundation formula pieces. So the remaining pieces here are related to the property tax rate. This is the Title 32, which is the taxation of finance, and then there's also at the end of this, property tax credit repeal, homestead exemption replacement, your discussion of supplemental district spending. This is the Title 32 measure. This is related to your property taxes. So I am on page 23 of that draft. You're going to see the reader assistance heading, education property tax rate formula.
Before we go on, can I just make a quick note for people? This is, now we are entering the territory that had kind of been as belonging to the finance committee. And Senator Ron Hemphill is, of course, on one will practice everything, of course, it is involved policy, but I think there's one, let's just understand what's in here. Because we're so we, anyway, just want to make that.
So, and we did already take out some language from the first section.
That will happen. I'm waiting for,
For the whole.
and if you're interested in seeing what those changes will look like, because I took 2 notes from yesterday, which is replacing the tuition section. And it sounded like there was appetite to switch potentially to the English language learning proficiency levels.
Mhm.
I can readily show you those language changes because they're in H454 as passed by the House. So I could pull those up if you're interested in just seeing that, but
No,
they exist. It's easy to pull in.
as long as we agree to those changes, and we're just going through the bill for changes that we want. For this section.
Yeah, so, okay. So we're gonna just kind of breeze through this, I think. Feel good.
So section 35 here. We're in the definition section of Title 32, your education property tax. And what you're going to see here is repealing concepts that are required exclusively for the current education funding system. So you're going to see a lot of struck language, things like education spending, excess spending. So those are current formula concepts, excess spending penalty, yields, adjustments, and the like. And then you're creating a new supplemental district spending concept that allows school districts to raise amounts above their educational opportunity payment at an equalized rate for their district. So in section 35, you're going to see.
Sorry, can I help you?
I am currently on page 23, but I'm hearing there may be a question before page 22.
Yeah. I don't know where supplemental school.
The SDS. Yep.
That before, so that would be the reserve before.
We can come back to the reserve. This is the core, the section that I'm talking about here is the core place where you will see the supplemental district spending.
Okay.
This sets out what it is, and then the following section raise the particular tax rate for that.
Mhm.
So on page 25, you're going to see a number of new definitions included here. I'm going to come back to recapture, which is what you see on line 4, because it's going to make more sense once I've talked about other pieces. So first, I'm just going to speak to subdivision 19, supplemental district spending. This is the spending that the voters of a school district approve in excess of their educational opportunity payment. So again, educational opportunity payment is just that base amount times the weighted long-term membership. So that's the aggregate amount that a school district gets. The supplemental district spending is the spending that the voters approve in excess of that for that fiscal year. And then there's a couple of provisions here. So provided that the voters of a school district other than an interstate school district shall not approve spending in excess of 10% the school district's educational opportunity payment for the fiscal year. So this is the 10% cap that you've heard talked about and that you guys have been talking about for SDS. And just to call out why there's a reference to interstate school districts, this concept is to be further worked on, but there are two kind of mechanical pieces here where we try to create a carve out for the interstate school districts to allow them to not create functional problems. Basically, if you had a limitation of no more than 10% for an incredibly small school district, it could mean that all sorts of programs are not available for them to fund with their supplemental piece rate. But I would just say, so that's why you see the carve out here is for interstate school districts to make sure that they are functionally treated differently in terms of what they can achieve with their supplemental district spending. I should say that's against the backdrop of contemplating that there would be larger district models. And so it's functionally different for a really small school district to be compared against significantly larger school districts, right?
I don't get that at all. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Because, so we have one interstate school district,
Two,
two,
Mhm.
which are the two?
Rivendell and, oh gosh, I'm not gonna know. We have two.
Okay, so we're kind of saying like, we could be creating unique problems for those two school districts?
Exactly. And just to, so the backdrop piece that I mentioned is important. When this language was included, the thinking was that you might be moving to significantly larger districts. And so what would it mean
Mm,
for a school district to be able to spend 10% above its EOP is functionally quite different for a large district as against these two interstate school districts, which we simply haven't been able to address this session, right? They can't so easily be integrated into those districts. They're federal law constructs. And so the thinking is if you just had these two really small school districts.
Are they
and
really small?
If you formed, say, 5 school districts, they would be quite small compared
But right,
to the
but
5.
if we're,
If you stick
but
with
how many people are in these two districts?
significantly fewer than 5,000, which would be something like your larger model, right? So the point is just that if you had a model of school districts where you had 5 or 12 quite large districts and then 2 super small districts relative to those, I'm not saying that they're small relative to current fall school districts.
Can someone guess by tomorrow how many students are in those two districts?
I can get you in 3 minutes.
Thank you.
The point is that the EOP
Yeah,
for those school districts would be significantly smaller because their weighted long-term membership is going to be smaller. And so what it would mean for them to have a 10% constraint is different, right? Because it means that they have a much lower constraint as to what they can pursue. And if you think that particular kinds of spending that you might want to do above the base are projects of a particular threshold, those projects would be achievable in a larger district, but not achievable in a smaller. That's the functional concern, is that it's functionally a different choice for a small district as against a large district to spend above the base at a cap of 10% of their EAP. Meaning they just don't, they're more constrained than a larger district. And this is why there's been the continuous discussion of the boundaries really mattering and trying to ensure some equal amount, like equal grand list across, limited variation along size. Try to ensure that you're treating these the same, because as soon as you start including mechanics like a 10% constraint that's tied to the EOP for a school district, it's going to matter what those boundaries are. So that's all that this is saying. And it's also recognizing, again, that they're federal constructs. So integrating them into whatever model happens is a larger question.
did we already go over 18 recapture?
Now I'm going to come back to that because
Okay.
it will make more sense once I've talked about some other pieces here. I'm going to jump to 21 per pupil supplemental district spending, and I will come back to I'm trying to do easy things and then jump to the harder mathematical concepts. Per pupil supplemental district spending is exactly what you would envision. It's a per pupil amount of that supplemental district spending. You divide your SDS by your long-term membership. So it's a per pupil amount.
What, can I go back to 20? Did everybody understand 20?
I will come back to that.
Oh,
after
you
I-
have, okay,
Exactly.
okay.
You're
We're
good.
going out of order?
Yeah, I'm trying to do
Okay.
the simple concepts to come back to the more
Okay.
complicated math that will use those concepts.
Okay.
So the per pupil amount, the thing I would note about this per pupil supplemental district spending is that the pupil count it uses is not weighted. It is long-term membership. And the conceptual justification for this is that the thinking is that the foundation formula builds in your weighted long-term membership into the educational opportunity payment that it produces. And so that number reflects weighted long-term membership. It recognizes educationally meaningful distinctions among students. And then your supplemental district spending is, doesn't need to make the same considerations, right? Because if you think that that foundation formula is adequate. Yeah.
But let's figure out a way to, it's not, I'm not, because to just
Yes.
breeze through this because, and maybe just identify which sections do what. And then if somebody like
I'll just say,
wants to spend.
these definitions make me worry about equity. That I'm really concerned about. I don't have to belabor it right now. I can put a pin in it, but this is education policy, how you can raise and who can raise and which districts are exempt from it. This is education policy. So this is the exact section I'm most concerned about, and everything related to supplemental spending that's allowed.
So the quick thing I could offer on that
Yeah.
front, the complicated definition in 20, that supplemental district spending yield, I'm not going to walk through it given time constraints, but that yield and the reference to school district with the lowest taxing capacity, those terms are used to equalize the rates that folks will use to raise any voted amount. So what it means is that any school district is going to apply the same tax rate to raise the same voted amounts. And the net result is that because they apply that tax rate against different tax bases, they produce different numbers. And that's what the recapture is. In a district that applies same tax rate, but has more property tax wealth to raise the same amount of funds that it's voted, it's going to raise extra dollars. And those extra dollars are recaptured and they're put in that supplemental district spending reserve. But the equalization that occurs through the yield. And what it's saying is anyone who vote any school district where they vote an amount, every school district is going to apply the same tax rate to raise that amount. And the net result is that in one district, they produce more funds and those funds are reserved, recaptured in that supplemental district spending.
Okay, I'm just gonna come out and say one of the concerns that I have, and someone can fact check me here. At least one of these interstate school districts has very high property values. It's the Upper Valley. So what does it mean that they have a totally other way that things are applied to them?
This was really just including carve-outs for the functional concern that I was describing, assuming that the school district boundaries that are envisioned are going to make that school district significantly smaller than the other school districts, meaning that what it could do with that 10% would be quite restricted as against a much larger model.
Okay, but it says in 22, school district with the lowest taxing capacity means the school district other than an interstate school district anticipated to have the lowest aggregate.
Yes.
What does that do?
The reason for this is that the lowest taxing capacity district is the method that you're using to equalize the rates. And because the interstate school districts don't have, we're talking about a theoretical world because we don't yet have these boundaries, because the interstate school district could have wildly different property values than those school districts envision. If you accidentally made the interstate school district the school district with the lowest taxing capacity, because it's not being thought about in the same way that the newly constructed boundaries are being considered, you throw off the equalization for all of the boundaries for all of the school districts in the state. These are functional considerations for not disrupting the foundation formula and these proposed equalization measures through the interstate school districts. But again, the thinking is there's more thinking to come on what happens with interstate school districts, but you don't want to throw off the whole model by accidentally disrupting your equalization measures and your cap just based on these two interstate school districts that are, again, constructs of federal law. So we have to work around that, right? It's not as simple as merging other districts, right? We'd have to have New Hampshire. So I would describe them as functional carve-outs. They're not concessions to the district. You could try them. The reason they were included is as functional carve-outs to not disrupt the system.
So, but they can still access supplemental district spending?
Yes, they can access supplemental district spending, but if you think about, we haven't gotten to the next section, which is the rate itself. Under our current system, when we think about variations in homestead rates across different districts, the way that we account for different education spending across districts, that variation, while it's borne by the state as a whole, right? That's not the way the supplemental district spending works. You raise the entirety of your supplemental district spending on your local grant list. So if you have a small district like an interstate school district as against a larger model, the only thing it would be able to raise is what it could raise on its local grant list. It's not, the state as a whole is not raising that amount. The equalization is about creating same application of a rate and then recapturing, but we're shifting from a model where variations in spending across the state are raised statewide, which is part of why the proposal has increased predictability.
So when this is all done, this won't be, John Gray Esquire sitting there putting his figures in, it'll be a logarithm or some kind of a program where people will actually put the data in.
Yeah,
So it comes out consistent when we get done with the policy.
I think I understand the concern. The way that I think about it is when under the current system, right, we have the December 1 letter come out and we, we have recommendations for the yield and the like, making particular assumptions. And a lot of background math has to go with that, right? Under the December 1 letter, under this proposal, the statewide education tax is set to raise the educational opportunity payment plus potentially some other expenditures from the ed fund. And you would be able to calculate that amount more readily than you might think you could do under the current system. And then for your supplemental district spending, the tax rate that you have to do to produce that is readily knowable. The December 1 letter will set out what this yield is, and it is truly I could calculate the math that produces this yield. In this case, you identify the lowest taxing capacity district, you ask what they raise at 1%, and it gives you a dollar figure. To set your supplemental district spending tax rate for your district, you would just divide the amount of voted spending that you have per pupil by that yield, and it would produce an outcome that would be your rate. So you would know at the time of voting, and the ballot language would in fact include what you would have to set the rate at to raise the voted amount. So when a voter is asking to do this particular piece, they will see, I mean, you could have potentially some slight variation, right? If there's been a miscount or something, but they would see at the time of voting what that rate is going to be, and they would also see how it related to last year's spending and variation across the state.
But I mean, here's my biggest concern in all of this stuff about supplemental district spending. That's the only thing they're essentially voting on. So they're looking at the whole budget, but they're just voting on the supplemental.
The way that it is currently structured, they are being provided just what they're voting on. The budget itself is the model now would be, at least as currently contemplated, the school districts are receiving the educational opportunity payment, and then it's for the school boards to set what happens with that money. Right? And this is part of why when we talk about setting the wards and how important it is to have proportionate representation, setting up these models, it really matters because it's not the voters going out and voting on the budget as a whole.
Right. What they would be voting right now, you get your ballot and it says you have a school budget of $40 million. Yes or no? So now it would say you have a supplemental spending amount of $5 million and the tax rate is equivalent to this. Yes or no?
Yeah, I can actually pull up the ballot language to show you.
Oh, great.
And what you're worried about is a better town, because we're all getting every town's the same funding.
Mm-hmm.
You're worrying like.
Held to the same standard.
Yeah.
Yes.
That, hey, we want to do a addition and we want to raise this because
Mm-hmm.
we can more than afford it.
Exactly.
And then they can budget up to 10% more than.
Yes, than the EOP. So
Right. And there are just other states have guardrails around this supplemental spending because it can get so, oh, we don't think we have a juice bar now, unless you actually set any parameters around it.
and you're correct that there are no
There's
current
not.
constraints proposed on what
Yeah.
the supplemental district spending is for. So here's your.
I mean, a juice bar sounds really nice, but
I would love some juice
I
right
would
now.
really like some juice right now.
So the ballot language, which I'm showing here on page 19, the first piece you're going to see here is informational. Because a voter is going to bear two tax rates, a statewide tax rate, and then the supplemental district spending tax rate, which is local. They would provide in the ballot what the anticipated statewide education tax rate is, because that's going to affect their overall burden rate. So they'd have that information. And then they would receive the definition of supplemental district spending, what we just talked about, that's what is deemed necessary above up to that 10% piece, but above the EOP. They would know the long-term membership of the school district, which is how you calculate that per pupil amount. The district's per pupil supplemental district spending, you would just take those two figures. And you would provide the supplemental district spending yield. The reason all of these factors are included is that from these factors, you can determine the rate. That's why this is here. And the actual budget vote would be in this form. Shall the voters of the school district approve the school board to expend X amount, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary in excess of the school district's educational opportunity payment. So it's not a vote on the budget as a whole. It's just what is that in excess of the EOP. And then the district estimates this proposed budget, if approved, will result in per pupil supplemental district spending of this amount, which is X percentage higher or lower than per pupil supplemental district spending for the current year. And then most importantly for the voters, and a supplemental district spending tax rate of, and they would be able to supply this number. It's truly just a mathematical calculation. A supplemental district spending tax rate of X per $100 to be placed at a geographic study.
So if they exceed that, then there's a penalty.
There is no penalty. It's simply an outright restriction. You can't do more than 10% of your EOP.
So if they make 40 million, they could do a $4 million.
Yeah, if they get a 40 million EOP, right, the 10% would be 4, and you could spend up to 4 million of that.
And you want to see guardrails on that 4 million. Correct, Senator Hinsdale?
I'd like to, yes, I'd like
Set
to
up
see
some
guardrails
parameters
on the
again.
supplemental spending, yeah. And I could get ideas from people this week, but I think it would be better if we said, we need to study how the supplemental district spending works so that it fits within our equity policies. And, you know, we look at other states' guardrails around what kind of spending qualifies for supplemental spending, because they usually don't allow it to go to your general education program. I'm sorry if I'm jumping around. This language just seems to be all over the place. I don't understand based on the last question, what the recapture definition does.
So the equalization measure, because it applies the same tax rate to raise an equal voted amount in any school district, but some school districts are going to be wealthier because they're applying the same tax rate, meaning they have the same burden that that poorer district would have, but they're applying it against higher wealth. It produces extra money. It produces money beyond what they voted. They are using a tax rate that raises more than what they voted to do, because they're applying a tax rate that is based on what the poorest school district would have to use. Everyone uses the same tax rate. And the effect is that the richer your district relative to the poorest district per pupil, you will produce more in wealth. And so that extra wealth that is produced is recaptured, and that is reserved within that supplemental district spending reserve. And the place that that's made available is it can offset miscalculations and then go to the school construction and special fund. But
And recaptured is at the AOE. Is that where that money's recaptured?
it's simply that all of the money that is raised through the supplemental, everything that is raised locally for the supplemental through the supplemental district spending tax rate goes up to the ed fund. The extra funds are recaptured and reserved within that reserve. And then the amount that you voted as a school district goes back out to you under the standard payment schedule that we currently do, throughout the year for education.
And then what about that 4 million supplement?
That's what they receive. That's what they receive. That goes back out to them. They receive the voted amount, which is that 4 million.
Okay, so when you have the higher district town, I'm just trying to get this, make sure I got it straight in my mind. They end up paying 1.25 over what their true budget was for their school. That quarter, the extra quarter stays in to help fund the other schools that didn't have.
That extra money would go to address miscalculations on the first hand, which may be minor, just if the counts were off or something to that effect, but ultimately would waterfall it into a school construction aid special fund, which would be available statewide. Okay.
Now,
So your community pays 6 million to get.
well, and I wonder saying if they want to be willing to, especially if it's a well-off school district, if they're willing to raise that 4 million, that say, hey, 10% of that or 20% of that 4 million you raise goes into either the construction fund or a different fund for spec that, the poor district wanted to put in a swing set, just couldn't afford it.
It's not for designated, right, the money that is recaptured.
Yep.
The only prescriptive place that it goes, right, is the school construction aid special fund. It is not that the school district gets to designate where.
I'm talking the 4 million,
Oh, yes, they can spend it as they.
okay, but if we say that money that when they go, again, this is to help the less fortunate school districts to give some equality out of that 4 million. Can we say that 20% or 10%, some percentage goes into another fund for a school that might not have the same ability, but has needs and their taxpayers just can't raise it?
So you can do that. I mean, I would say in that effect, I want to call it hitting them twice, but they've applied an equalized rate to raise extra funds that would then be made available statewide. And then you would also be saying, and of the voted amount, you have to give away in part that you voted, right? So it would, you wouldn't have the amount that you voted would be the net result.
Right, and that's why I'd say like 10%, which still would be good to go into a fund to help
So
to keep more equity between all the school districts.
an initial proposal in the House had been to have a penalty built in, so you would have penalty plus equalization. And that could result in extra money beyond the equalization piece being available, but there's all kinds of things you can construct. I mean, if you want.
So are we headed toward trying to develop some language about a study?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, like, obviously this is the bigger question for the whole Senate, but I don't know that I'm ready to endorse this proposal. I mean, my last question in this line of questioning was, so if you try to raise 5% in your district, but you don't hit the 10% with your equalized rate, right? So let's say your district says we want to raise 5%.
Uh-huh.
So raising 5% more gives you 8% more. Like, where is the recapture only after 10%?
No. Two different kinds of percentages
Okay.
applied here. The 10% piece is 10% of your EOP. It's setting, you can think of it as the amount that you can vote. You can vote up to 10% of your EOP.
Mhm.
The other percentages that result in recapture are not, there's a recapture at
Oh.
whatever you do. If
Oh,
you raise
got it.
0.1%, you have recapture, assuming you're not the poorest district. The poorest district will raise exactly the amount that it votes because the equalized rate is set based on what they do.
Okay.
But there's always recapture, it is not tied to the 10%. So in every instance, a school district that has voted a particular amount is applying the same rate to raise those funds. It's just that they each raise different amounts of funds using that same rate because they have different property tax base.
Okay.
Can we get modeling on that?
We don't have,
Not time, I'm just saying in the near future. Is that something that can be done, model to know what the fourth district does, so we know what it looks like?
well, we know the forest district is dollar for dollar.
Mhm.
And then after that, there's gonna be some increment.
We just won't know what the poorest district is. It's likely to keep them. I mean,
It's likely,
just
but could be.
proper. They don't have
could be
special properties.
Could be some funds, there could be some random district somewhere else.
The effect of this equalization mechanic will vary wildly based on what the school districts are.
Right.
Just
Right.
Right.
if you have relatively equal grand list values per pupil across districts, then the
Right.
equalization effect is going to be relatively minor. If you have huge variation, you could have folks raising twice what they.
So based on what we've heard, if we took the poorest property on wealthiest and not wealthiest districts in the state right now, it's like a Chittenden County district and a Northeast Kingdom district. So if we use two of those districts at the either end to compare what would happen in a vote, I mean, how would we understand how this functionally works?
You got a question for me?
I don't know, because you're shaking your head, so.
So wait,
You're making.
You'll keep it still for now on.
I will say
State
to
name.
Julia Victor JFO, to John's point, and I think the whole committee discussion, it really does depend on districts.
Mhm.
We have done some pretty extensive modeling that we've presented in your finance committee and in the House Ways and Means Committee that I can also send to the committee, that essentially looks at grand list per pupil.
of different regions. And I think that committee members might be surprised in terms of what that analysis shows
Per pupil.
in terms of which districts have the highest and the lowest, or which regions
Yeah.
have the highest and lowest grand list value per pupil. So I will send that along. The other piece is ultimately it will depend on district spending decisions, right? So the equalization mechanism, to John's point, if every single school district across the state has the exact same grand list per pupil, everybody has the same tax rate and everybody keeps everything that they raise. The equalization mechanism is only used when you more and more as you have more variance between grand list per pupil of each district. Right? So the district configurations will completely determine the level of that equalization mechanism and the impact that it will have on different districts to be determined tax rates.
So when we cut it down for the smaller districts, that's gonna be an easier number to calculate and figure out, correct? From like-
Smaller districts like
Like down
fewer,
to 15,
or-
yeah, if we only had 15 districts rather than 119, it's gonna make that calculation easier to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, to John's point, the calculation is really quite simple. I'm also happy to send along, I have a slide deck that's breaks it out, like simple, just basic arithmetic.
That help.
Where essentially what we do is you just look at every school district. What is the grand list per pupil? The school district that has the lowest grand list per pupil, you're just gonna benchmark all of the other districts against that.
I guess that leads, oh, sorry, like,
No.
yeah, Terry.
So, and this may lead into what you're thinking. So based on what you've heard for Senator Van Hinsdale's concerns, can you create language in this bill that will, I want to get away from study committees. I mean,
Okay, I hear it.
that is, all that does is kick the can down the road. I want to get this thing nailed shut
So
quickly.
the request, as I take it, is to identify what the permissible uses of the fund should be. So I can't just create that,
Right,
like that is something that you need to know.
Right.
if you
We
want
could
to
work
make-
on it next week.
With a policy.
Yeah, and I think we have to be very careful about working with the finance committee on this because this is
Sure.
their turf more than ours. I get the fact that everything's policy, but so I want us to be respectful of
That's the next
but I think having some sense of what we would like in conveying that is legitimate. Maybe that's what you want to do, is just convey the.
There's just a difference between educational equity and tax equity. Those are two still very different conversations. I just want to make that clear. And what's interesting about, I hadn't thought about it as grand list per pupil. To me, then it doesn't matter the size of your district. I don't know why we would say that interstate districts are special, because they could have a very small number of students and a lot of wealth, or they could have a lot of students and a lot of wealth, and that would look different, but it wouldn't be measured against somebody else. It would be an internal measure.
The reason it matters for a small district as against a larger, regardless of what the grand list per pupil is that it's the cap is 10% of your EOP. And the EOP that a small district, regardless of what its wealth level is going to be significantly smaller than the EOP for a large district. That's the reason you have a carve out from the 10% cap. It means that functionally their choices as to what they can raise locally are quite different because they're literally capped at a dollar amount that is significantly lower. Even if they could raise it on their wealth easily, they're literally capped at a significantly lower dollar amount.
Then that makes me worry a lot that these two are incongruent things to be putting together. Because you could have any district in that position where their EOP is much different than what they would need to spend for supplemental, because they're a huge district with lots of few students. These seem like incongruent ways to measure supplemental spending, regardless of if you're an interstate district or not.
I think you are hitting on something super important, which is that the school district boundaries matter significantly for how you set up the supplemental district spending. So another way to think about this, until you know what the district boundaries are, It's hard to say how you should set this up. And this is
I would say,
a theory. This is
what we need to get the boundaries.
This is a theory as to how you can do it. But if you ended up with a different set of boundaries than our kind of then this model is predicated on, you would want to revisit the way that you did it.
Right.
So
And this is why these two committees need to talk to each other more than they generally do.
We got to deal with the hubs too.
So, let's just put this on the list of something to try to get to next week then.
We might talk to the chair of finance and say, it might be better to study this whole section than to say, this is what we think we're gonna do, but we're not sure. Because I think it creates winners and losers. That isn't what we want to do.
If this committee would like us to send that message to them, then we think that would be a good idea. That I would feel good. I think that within our, but we suggest.
I'm looking at Terry because he doesn't like studies, and I don't either, but I don't like the idea of language that we don't really know what it's going to do to people.
Senator Weeks, I see you've been writing a lot of some things you want to rate. We haven't been through for a minute. Okay. Okay.
I am whittling down my topics to bare bones.
Okay. Let's pick up this discussion tomorrow, and if I'm very comfortable with that idea. If you wanted to send that signal to the,
I'll just say, to put a fine point on it, you can do something for tax equity that very much creates education inequality.
So, we continue. Tomorrow at
So I did look at the Senate schedule tomorrow. There's like 6 bills on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a light day.
One day.
Good.
No, it doesn't.
No, I wouldn't hear that.
That was a short one.
It's short, but it will have debate. I feel like, maybe not, but it just, I used to do Barry a lot and it ends up with a lot.
So we've got a couple of things issues that got raised around. That's work. We're not looking for any new modeling from what I don't think.
It's not on that.
And we haven't asked John to do anything new at this point. So we're going to put all of you on the list for tomorrow. Probably do some thinking, but maybe we'll start with that again and make this for a local committee discussion.
And just to call out to the extent that a firm plan is formed, is helpful for us to know the plot so that if things are happening financially. Yeah.
And if you have times that you are committed, we won't be there. Let me know.
I think the way that we've been addressing it so far is like between these two committees, we're trying to negotiate, like, for instance, yield bill didn't happen today, but we will be presumably doing yield bill stuff
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Which would be us.
In and out, and just let me know when you are, we'll try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you guys can let us know too what you're thinking in terms of ordering, and we can probably.
Okay. Well, we plan to start, all things being equal, we'll start with that tomorrow, although if you're time constrained,